Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Welcome to episode 1 of the Children's Book Podcast with me, Eleanor Page. Before we launch into our first interview, I wanted to give a bit of a backstory because this podcast initially started off as Creative Genius at Play. And even though I am a children's book author and have been for the last, 6-7 years now, I think, my interest at one point really went to trying to be a better creative overall. And so I had this fantastic idea to start Creative Genius at Play podcast and make it all about creativity for everyone. And after recording 15 episodes, I kind of ran out of oomph. I just didn't really want to do anymore. I think that's kind of common in lots of creative fields. And often it tells me personally, I don't know if you can relate to this, but for me, that's often a sign that it may not be the right thing for me to focus my creative energies on. So after leaving the podcast alone for a year and just allowing it to simmer there quietly and waiting to see what the next inspiration would show me, I woke up and thought, do you know what? My greatest thing, the thing I'm obsessed with, is writing children's books. It's what I do for a living. Why aren't I just focusing everything I've got on that? And rather than start the whole podcast from scratch, because the 15 interviews that I did are absolutely hugely relevant to children's book authors, they were amazing for me, I decided to include them in the podcast. So you might hear me say throughout, Creative Genius at Play. That's because they were recorded with that podcast in mind. I have edited out the very beginning of the podcasts because that's where I introduce the Creative Genius at Play podcast and am now doing these intros to every podcast episode just so I can touch base with you personally before the interview begins. And so let's begin. Episode 1 is with Jessica Brody. Now, Jessica, I had her on another one of my podcasts, and I was so thrilled when she agreed to be on this podcast, episode 1. I mean, what a legend. Not a lot of people agree to be interviewed on episode 1. Especially when they're so established in the industry as Jessica is. People will often want to go on a podcast that has a lot of episodes and shows that it's going to have a long life ahead of it. So it was incredibly generous of Jessica to be on the show. She is an amazing author. She's written and published over 20 novels for teens, tweens, and adults. So many. Go check them out. You can see them in the show notes. I'll have all the links to that. And we do talk about this in the interview, which is amazing. She was hired by Disney Press and has written several books based on very popular Disney franchises such as Descendants and Lego Disney Princess. I mean, wow, how cool is that? And she's also the author of the #1 best-selling plotting guide for novelists, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And that book is everything to me. I tried so many different ways of plotting out books until she wrote that book. And there is Save the Cat in general, which is still good, but wasn't as helpful for me until Save the Cat Writes a Novel came out. And Jessica wrote that. And I have that like a Bible next to me when I write anything and everything, from picture books all the way up to my middle grade novels. And then on top of all that, she is also the founder of Writing Mastery Academy, which is an online learning platform designed to help writers break through challenges and ultimately achieve their goals. And that's definitely on my to-do list to join the academy. I've been putting it off, but now that I've made a bit of space in my life, I'm 100% going to join. I encourage you to go check it out. So let's dive into the interview with Jessica. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn a lot from it on your quest to become the children's book author. Welcome back to the Creative Genius at Play podcast. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Jessica Brody. There she is on the screen. Best-selling fiction and non-fiction author and writing teacher and mentor at the Writing Mastery Academy. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be, back for the first time on this show, but back with you from as an interviewer.
Yeah. So I interviewed you maybe a couple of years even now.
Has it been? Wow.
It probably has, because 2020 just isn't on our radar. We've just wiped the whole year out. So it was probably a year before that. And that, you were on the Indie Kidlit podcast, which was a book for children's book authors, a podcast for children's book authors. And this time we're talking creativity in general for all creative people. But I think of you as one of the most creative people I know. Hence, when I decided to start this podcast, you were one of the first people that popped up in my head. You do so much as well as teaching. Tell me a little bit about your journey and all the things you've accomplished, of course, all within an hour. Don't take the whole hour, but,
well, thank you for that.
Your journey.
Thank you for that lovely compliment, and I'm pleased to be one of the early guests on your podcast. So my journey kind of starts out a little bit generically in terms of I was, trying to get published, and I worked as a financial analyst and wanted to be a writer, and got rejected for years and years and years. And we've heard that story a million times. The sort of pivot point for my story, or the catalyst, I guess you could say, in Save the Cat terms, was the introduction of a book called Save the Cat, a screenwriting book that somebody gave to me way back when in my frustrating publishing journey when I was trying to get published. And they said, this might help with your novel writing, even though it's for screenplays, because it's really all about structure. And I read the book, and it did kind of change my life, because, not to speak in hyperbole, but it really did. In that I learned about story structure for the first time. I realized what was going wrong in my current manuscript. I rewrote my manuscript based on this Save the Cat structure method. And I sold that manuscript, and I've, sold over 20 novels since to major publishers. And, I always look back at that moment as the place where it all kind of fell into it. Well, it all kind of came together. And I've just been writing ever since. I've dabbled around in different genres now. I was writing originally women's fiction. And then I switched to young adult contemporary. I've now done 2 sci-fi trilogies. And I've also started writing for middle grade, which is the 8 to 12-year-old age group. So I've just been dabbling, and I don't know what my next challenge is. I'm thinking maybe I want to write a murder mystery, but I've never done that. So we'll see.
Yes, so that attitude to just take on new creative adventures and not be necessarily scared or intimidated by that. How do you find that confidence to do that?
It's definitely come over the years, but for me, it's just all about play. I know that kind of fits with the name of your podcast, but I just like to play around. And so many of my projects just start out as me kind of, quote, playing around, and then become more of a serious thing. When I wrote my latest sci-fi trilogy, just right behind me, Sky Without Stars is the first one. It's a sci-fi retelling of Les Misérables. And I'd never written an off-planet, like other world type of fantasy or sci-fi, and it was very scary. I co-wrote it with a friend, actually. And at the beginning, we sort of just were like, let's just play around. We both had other things going on, and we said, let's just see what we can come up with. And it started out kind of like just a game. And we just had a lot of fun with it. And then it coalesced into a real book, and we ended up selling it to Simon & Schuster. But at the beginning, it was like, this is fun. Like, let's just have some fun. So I think for me, I chase the ideas that sound fun. Especially the new ones, because I would never write something that I think is like, on trend, or, oh, those types of books are doing really well, I'm going to try that, because I know that's going to be disastrous for me. I write the things that I've been reading a lot of murder mysteries lately that I've just been really like, this is fun. Like, I love reading these. I wonder if it would be as fun to write them. So that's where I approach it from.
I love that. So you're really following that inner excitement and passion. And I would imagine you need to have that, because otherwise maybe finishing the book won't get there. Like, it'll fizzle out, and you perhaps won't have the enthusiasm to keep it going. Or if it's, as you say, a trilogy, if it didn't start fun, then do you find that maybe, have you had an experience like that at all?
Well, but it's absolutely true. I mean, if you don't have that initial excitement for a project, you'll never, well, I won't say you'll never, it will be very hard for you to get to the end, because my thing is, I always say inspiration runs dry really fast. It's completely fickle. You can't rely on it. I always say, like, inspiration is the worst roommate, because they just they leave messes. They disappear for, weeks at a time. They don't leave rent checks. Like, they don't leave notes. And then, you're stuck by yourself having to like deal with this book. But the thing that I say is always reliable, you can always count on, is your own discipline. And so, you have to kind of have that from the start in order to push you through. But then at the same time, you have to really, in order to have that discipline, you have to really love what you're doing. So just to say, like, oh, Gone Girl is a really big book, I'm going to write a Gone Girl, because I think it's going to be successful. It's going to be hard to follow that through with, if you didn't start out going, I want to write that kind of book because I think that sounds like a lot of fun, or I think I'm very inspired by that idea.
Yeah, and I've done a few of your courses, which are amazing.
Thank you.
I'm not just saying that, truly, like, I am a fangirl of your courses, because what I love about them is they're so practical, and you can absolutely tell that you've been in the trenches, had that problem, and then found your own solution to that problem, and then thought, I wonder if there's other people with this problem as well. So some of the ones that pop to mind that I've done from you, you've got so many, and now I love that you have them all in the Writing Mastery Academy. There's plug. But truly check it out, people, because, I don't recommend people there lightly. Like, every single course in there is, like, in my opinion, should be a $500 course. They're so good.
Thank you.
I go so far as to say that if you went through those courses, you'd probably start to know what you were doing creatively and get some of that creative confidence that you really want. But the two courses that spring to mind as you're talking is the one about coming up with book ideas, and also the productivity one. And I mean, they're different from each other, but let's start with the one about coming up with ideas. It's tell us a bit about that, because I found that course really unique and super important, because if you don't come up with a good idea to start with, then, as you said, maybe your book's not going to get sold. Maybe it won't sell if you publish it yourself. Maybe you'll run out of enthusiasm as you're writing. It's just a fantastic concept, and really key that you remind people, come up with a good idea first, people, or you can't market and sell it.
Yeah, that was actually, it's called, Develop Blockbuster Ideas That Sell. And that was sort of my first ever course, actually. I love doing the courses, and you hit it right on the head. That's exactly how I build my courses. It's based on problems that I have, or based on problems that people come to me with and say, I'm struggling with this. And I think, oh, well, yeah, I've struggled with that too. And here's how I dealt with it. And then I turn that into a course. Essentially, those are the nuggets that start all my courses. But Blockbuster Ideas course, it comes from it comes from my philosophy that there's sort of two sides to the creative process. And that is, there's the there's the business side of it. If you want to turn it into a business, that's not to say that you have to. I'm a firm believer that if you want to just write just because you love to write, then that's what you should do. But there's people out there like me who want to turn it into a business, and they want to make money from writing, and they want it to be their full-time job or a secondary job. And so I come at that course is specifically designed for those types of people who love the creative process and love to brainstorm and love to come up with exciting ideas, but then want to make sure that they are on a track that they're going to be, that gives them the best chance of success of using that idea to turn it into a business. So that's why it's called Blockbuster Ideas That Sell. And it's just all about this concept called high concept ideas. And this is a term I did not make up. It's a term that they've been using in the industry for years. Essentially, high concept means it's an idea that you can explain to someone in one sentence and they sort of immediately get why it's going to be good. And that's a very abstract concept, idea this idea of high concept. And so what I try to do, because people, myself included, didn't really understand what that meant, I try to break it down into these 4 ingredients of I kind of looked at all the high concept ideas I've sold, all the high concept ideas that I've loved that people have called high concept. And I said, what do these things have in common? And I break it into these 4 ingredients. I teach those ingredients. And then I have like brainstorming exercises that are all based on ways that I've come up with book ideas, to help you kind of pull out from your life, from your experiences, from things you see, from the newspaper, like things that you can use to brainstorm these kinds of ideas that have the best chance of getting sold, whether that be to a publisher or if you publish it yourself to readers.
Yeah. And it's a really, I find the process of the course is a creative genius at play course, because it is essentially very playful and it's a merging of things and you come up with a result. Whereas what I find is most other things out there say, to come up with ideas, read the newspaper. And I'm like, read the newspaper? No, nothing. Nothing. It's almost like that. It really is genius because you're saying, hey, take a whole combination of stuff. And you do that so well with your books. Like every single one of your books is essentially that high concept that you're talking about. It's this real fusion of, like the movies we watch. We think, what clever, very simple. Our favorite movies have a really simple concept, but it's so different because they've just merged those 2 different things. So amazing.
Thank you.
And really, really reminds me about how you actually can find your own unique style as a writer, because what I merge and make as my story is not going to be what you choose to merge and make your story. So talk to us a bit about how you found your unique style as a creative.
Well, I get this question a lot.
Have you found it yet? Have you found it?
No, I mean, I'm still looking under every rug I pick up. I get it. I get asked a lot, like, how do you find your voice? How do you find your creative, style? And this is one question that I haven't figured out how to answer yet. Once I figure it out, I'll make a course. But
you will totally. I will buy that course.
I haven't quite figured out how to answer that question apart from a lot of trial and error. And I know that's not like a super practical or straightforward answer, but I think a lot of us, we dabble and we try different styles and we emulate different people to realize that we can't write the way they write, but it's all practice. And when I first started out, all I wanted to do was write Bridget Jones's Diary. And I tried so hard to write Bridget Jones's Diary and, as Jessica Brody's Diary or whatever. I tried so hard. And the book that I was writing at the time, I was even pitching it. It's a Bridget Jones's Diary in Los Angeles. It never sold. And I think because I was trying so hard for it to be something else. And it wasn't until I kind of realized that I had to just write what I wanted to write and let my own style show that I kind of was able to sell something. But that being said, it's constantly changing, with every book I write, it's sort of a different style. I try, the reason I love genre hopping is so that I don't kind of get stuck in this one type of writing or this one style of storytelling or this one voice. I love trying different things so I can keep it fresh. But yeah, I can't, it's hard to tell people how to find themselves. It's like, how do I find myself? You just have to keep looking.
Keep looking. And I did do my homework before I got onto this interview and read some of your fiction books. And again, what jumped at me was that even though there's, I suppose you could say, a similar voice, can you tell that Jessica wrote it? Maybe. But for me, and maybe this is a thing unique to writers, it felt like there was I could really hear the character's voice. So in other words, I think what you've gotten so good at, probably taken years. Well, I don't know. Tell us, how long did it take? In fact, do you need to have your own voice, or do you need to get really good at capturing that character's voice of the book you're writing?
Yeah, I think it's both. I feel like when I start a new book, there's always sort of a transition period where it's like all of the voices are kind of coming out at once, and it depends on the book. 'Cause there's some books that I'm just the voice comes to me right away. I wake up with a line in my head and I write it, and it just, everything flows from there. Well, not everything, but it starts to flow from there. And those books are few and far between. The one that comes to mind is a book that I wrote called The Chaos of Standing Still, where I just sort of started writing it, and it felt like this character was speaking through me. Not all books
That's one of the ones I read. That was one of the ones I read. That was probably why.
It's sort of it holds a special place for me, because it did feel like one of those channel books. Yeah.
Yeah, it read like that. It totally read like that. I was like, wow. I was like, this isn't even her writing. This is completely the character.
I wish that was like that for every book. It's not. For a lot of books, I have to kind of play around, and sometimes the voice doesn't come until the second draft. Sometimes I'll be writing a book for months, and I'll get to, the one line in one chapter, and I'll go, there it is. That's the voice. And the character will say something, or they'll comment on something or whatever, and it will pop up, and I'll go, that's the character. They just showed up. And then I'll have to go back and make sure that they're in the earlier pages. So I think it's different with every project, but I think it is important that your own sort of style comes through. I definitely think I have a style, but then that the character is also showing through as well. And that's regardless of whether you're writing in first person or third person. There is a character in there that needs to show up as well as yourself.
That's really good advice, actually, that, I really value that you said that, because I'm much, much earlier in my writing career. And I'll often just sort of think, maybe I'm not supposed to be a writer, because I try to get that character, and I'm like, nope, they are not cooperating.
Yeah.
But so sometimes with some books, it might actually take time to discover them.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of times I'll be writing something, and, the voice, I just sort of am telling the story at the beginning, whether the voice is there or not. And then I'll meet someone, or I'll get a fan letter from a reader, and there's something about the way that they talk in their email, or the way that somebody is and I'll be like, that something will connect in my mind and go, oh, it's not like that person becomes the character, but there'll be something about the way they said something, and I'll go, that's what I need. That's what it's missing. So I think it's not just in the playing around with the writing, but just keeping your eyes open, because we are surrounded by characters. And I actually remember this happening with my book, 52 Reasons to Hate My Father. I was really struggling with, there's interstitials in the book where it's a recording of the character doing a video. So this was long before video was we lived in the Zoom world. I wrote this book in 2010. But I was trying to find a way to kind of create sort of an interstitial where the character could really interact with the reader on a much more informal way. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And then there was this teenager friend / reader that I had, and she used to send me these adorable little video messages. She would record on her phone and mail them to me or something. And they would just be these rambling, free thought, she would just go off, and then, she would interrupt to be yell at her cat or whatever it was. And they were so freaking adorable. And I thought, that's what it's missing. It's missing that like just real life person. And so I created this idea of this girl is leaving video messages throughout the book. And the thing you see in the book are the transcripts of the messages. But again, it just kind of, I was already done with the first draft by the time I got that idea. And then I had to kind of work it in.
Wow, that's so clever. I love, again, see, there's that almost curiosity. So you'd be so good at writing that murder mystery. You are like a little detective because you're looking at the pieces and going, oh, that bit and that bit and that bit, and just merging them into your current project. And I think that's so true. When you're writing a book, it feels as though your life becomes the book, every bit of information. You know, like I bet the sort of, the more kind of spiritual people would be like, the universe is sending me this. But essentially, it's a bit like when you buy a car, isn't it? When you want to buy that car, you start noticing every other car that is like that. It's where attention goes, right? The information follows.
Yes.
Now, the spiritual thing might be true. I'm not discounting that for all you spiritual people out there. But essentially, it is so much about that attention. So do you write one book at a time, and is your creativity completely centered on that one book you're writing, or do you have multiple projects on the go?
I try to draft one book at a time. It's very hard for me to be, so I sort of divide the book writing process into two parts, drafting and revising. And because I do feel like they're two different skills and they require two different writers. So I almost feel like I'm a different person when I'm revising a book than when I'm drafting. So I try to only draft one book at a time, because I think drafting is sort of when you are the most in the character's head, because you're trying to really navigate the world through their eyes, and you're trying to come up with ideas that they would do and things like that. And so I feel like that's when you are the most immersed in it. When you're revising, you're also immersed, but you're immersed almost technically. You're immersed you're trying to figure out the little nitty gritty details. You're trying to figure out the plot and how it intersects. And you're thinking more like a writer, I think, and almost like a builder and an architect. So, I feel like that is a different skill, and I'm able to, if necessary, I'm able to draft one book and revise a different book, but I don't love doing that because it does it just takes away a little bit of the magic that you get to spend that time. Like you said, so much of what we write is not when we're writing it. It's when we're just out in the world, and or that time when we used to go out in the world and now we're stuck inside. But just right. Everything you do, you're doing through the lens of this project. Like every movie you watch, you're watching through the lens of the project. Every person you meet is a potential new character. So I think that immersion process is so fun and magical that it can be, for me anyway, it can kind of disrupt it when I try to work on too many things at once. But given my deadline schedule and the fact that I have a hard time saying no to projects, a lot of times I do end up with those overlaps that I have to manage.
I love that you made the distinction between I won't say one's creative and one's not. I think they're both aspects of your creativity, but very different aspects of your creativity. As you said, the drafting sounds, from what you're telling me, and I'm just learning so much from chatting to you about this, that it's really playful. And I know I gave the podcast that title, but it kind of came to me not because I did a lot of study and thought that's what I'll call it. It just felt like creative genius wasn't quite enough. That just sounded a bit harsh, whereas the at play part is that part. And I love that you then go, that's okay. Now, I was very playful, but now I'm going to put on that almost creative genius hat and be really tough love here. Yeah. And edit these things so that it makes sense to the reader. Yeah. And that the reader now enjoys it.
Yes, it's absolutely true. The first draft you're drafting for you, and the second draft you're drafting for the reader, I think.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I said that by accident, but there you go.
No, but you hit it. You hit it. It's almost like the first draft is the one where you're the playful writer, and the second draft is the one where you're the serious writer. It was like, okay, this scene was fun, but it doesn't really fit the plot, so it's gotta go. Yep. Fantastic.
So as you said, you've got a lot of timelines that you have to meet. And you're not sort of just leisurely writing books at your own pace like I am. You are actually meeting your deadlines. And again, one of your courses is on that productivity, which I mentioned. Give us some of your top tips
for productivity.
Yes. What do you do? How do you stay productive? Do you have blocks? Do you have like times where you don't write? Mm-hmm.
I do blocks of my day. I divide the day into blocks. And the morning block is always my drafting block. So this is usually between like 8 and noon. So one of the things I do is, this is like one of my really hard and fast rules that I do share in Productivity Hacks. But it's basically that the less distracted you are as a writer, the better writer you are and the more productive writer you are. So I talk about in the class, I talk about how every morning that you wake up, you basically wake up with a brand new computer as your brain. So if you think about when the first time you got your computer and like how you open it up and it just runs so beautifully and it's not, sluggish and it doesn't get bogged down with, doesn't have a ton of things loaded and it just worked like a dream, right? So if you think about your brain every morning, you have that. But everything that you do throughout the day, like, check email and get on social media and watch the news and read a book and listen to a podcast. And, all the other things that you're doing are turning on programs in your brain and they're taking up RAM and they're taking up, brain power. So if you want to get the most productive writing done, you have to do it before you open up any of those other programs. So it needs to be the only program running on your brain. So I highly recommend that people write first thing in the morning before they do anything else. That's what I do. So I don't open a single device except my laptop and my Word document. I don't look at any news. I don't check my phone. I actually have my phone in a whole other room from where I sleep. I don't even look at it. The only thing I do is I take my dog for a quick walk. I meditate and I eat my breakfast and then I go write. And I feel like I've been doing that. The first book I ever did that process for was The Chaos of Standing Still. So, I feel like since I've been doing that, I think it's since January of 2015, it's just been a game changer. Like I can't even imagine how I wrote before this, because it's just the distraction-free writing is so, you will just be amazed at how magical it feels, to be able to write with you don't realize how distracted you are until you turn them off. And then when you write and you see the difference, especially after maybe not the first or second day, but after a week, although a lot of people who take the course report like day one, they were like, whoa, I wrote like 5,000 words. I've never done that. So I think that any creative endeavor that you are taking on, I challenge creatives. I say, what is your creative project the most important thing to you? Apart from obviously your family and your health and all those other. But if you think about everything you have to do in that day, is your creative project the most important thing? And most people say yes. And I say, then why are you doing it after you're checking email? You're basically saying that your email is more important than your creativity. And you're letting that email take up all this brain space, which essentially all email is people wanting things from you. So you're letting everyone else in the world dictate where your brain is going instead of you dictating where it's going, and it should be going to your creative project if that is the most important thing to you. So it's just about sort of shifting your priorities and saying, this is most important. I'm going to dedicate the best of my brain to it.
It's kind of really simple, but it's very profound. And I'd imagine some people will be like, what? Not even look at the phone? Not even glimpse at it? But you're right.
I was terrible. I used to sleep. I mean, I say terrible and I'm going to say something and someone's going to be like, that's what I do. But I used to sleep with my phone next to my bed, like most people probably do. I would wake up in the morning. I'd grab my phone. I would check email. I'd check social media. I would play a game of Candy Crush. I would do like a million things before I even got out of bed. And then I would get out of bed and then I would do, my morning stuff. Then I'd do that all over again. And then by the time I got to my desk, I was so exhausted. I was like, I had no brain power left for my book. So I started, the only way I could do it was to sleep with my phone in the other room. And I would actually put it, I don't have to do this anymore, but I would put it in a drawer so I couldn't even see it. Cause you see it and it's amazing how tempting, you see it in your periphery vision. You go, oh, I have to look at it. And I catch myself doing that sometimes still, not in the mornings anymore. I'm past that, but like just throughout the day, I'll see it and go, oh, there must be something to look at. I'll go grab it. But that's the thing that kind of keeps you from fully immersing with your creativity, I think.
Yeah, really, really powerful advice. And it does, I have read that the official thing on it is that it takes 66 days to create a new habit.
Not is it 66 now?
66. It isn't that 21-day thing that, you know, all the coaches jumped on 21 days for this and 21 days isn't long enough to create an actual pattern in the brain where now you think you're choosing to get up and write and not do those other things, but actually you will have made the neural pathways in the brain that make it like impossible for you to resist. So remembering we've now got habits of getting up and looking at the phone, or like you said, turning off all those other things. And there's so many books on, like, you know, the artist's resistance and blocks and creative block, you know, not being able to write. I'm wondering, and I'm assuming it's true because you've experienced it, doing that process actually breaks away resistance. Do you like go to sit and think, because you don't get distracted now, you have to do your writing? Do you just do it?
Yeah, it's not even a question anymore. It used to be a question. It used to be not will I write today, but will I be able to write today? Or what will come out? And of course, I never know what's going to come out. I never know if I'm going to have a good writing day or a bad writing day. And not all writing days are good. But they're not all bad either. But I will say it's never a question of whether I'm going to get my writing done anymore. And I get, you know, I usually try for between 1,500 and 2,000 words a day. Which is, you know, sort of in the middle ground. I know people who try for 5,000 words. I know people who try for 500. It doesn't really matter the number. You find the number that's comfortable but challenging for you. And, you know, I tell people once it becomes part of your routine, you don't think about it anymore. It's like, you know, it's like brushing your teeth. You know, once you're older than 10, you don't like hem and haw over it. You're not like, I'll brush my teeth later. I'm going to do a bunch of other stuff first. And eventually I'll brush my teeth. And then you like kind of go to the bathroom and then hold the toothbrush. And, no, I'm not ready. Like you don't do that. You just get up and you brush your teeth and you don't think about it. And, I think writing has become that for me now with this routine that I've set up for myself. It's like I get up and I write and that's it. And yeah, some days the writing is terrible, but I did it because it's what I do. And I think the more you can make your creative process part of your routine, the less you do have to think about it and the less resistance. There is just no resistance anymore.
No resistance anymore. Oh my gosh, I so look forward to that day where resistance just goes away forever.
I mean, I'm not going to lie and tell you that it's like every day you're like, yay, I get to write, because it's not like that. Yeah. There is days where I'm like, you know, there's not days where I go, oh, I don't think I can do it today. There's days where I'm not as excited to do it. There's days where I sit down, I'm not that excited about the scene, but it's never a question of will I or won't I. I just do. So I will say that's the caveat. It's that the resistance is not that it kind of changes shape. It's not that I'm like every day, like, yay, writing, because that's not the way it goes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
No. And I have heard other people say that they've read back over their writing and they actually couldn't tell what they wrote on their good or bad days. That actually some of the bad days, good stuff came out, and some of the good days, bad stuff came out.
That's true.
So it sort of starts to merge a little bit. That's terrific. So tell me a little bit about, because I have to ask, I saw that you've been writing for Disney. Oh,
yes.
My goodness. And my daughter, she said, who are you interviewing? And I said, well, Jessica's written some of the Descendants books. And she's like, OMG, because she loves anything Descendants. So how did that opportunity come about? What was that like? Was it different than your other books? What's the process like in writing for Disney?
It was magic. I haven't written for Disney in a few years now. But they actually approached me about this series, the Descendants School of Secrets, which was like a spin-off of the Descendants movies. So I wrote 5 of these for them. And I also wrote some fun Disney Lego Princess chapter books, which are for much younger readers. As you can see, they've got cute pictures. And so I wrote a few of those. But yeah, they they came to me and they said, I just started writing for middle grade audience. And they said, are you interested in, doing a project like that? Typically people ask me all the time, like, how do you get to write for Disney? It typically goes through an agent, not all the time. Like if you happen to know an editor at Disney and they know you're writing, like they might come to you directly, but typically it goes through an agent, and like Disney or whoever the publisher who's doing the project will reach out to agents they know and say, do you have any writers who would fit? And then the agent kind of pitches a few of their clients. So this one, I knew the editor through a friend. And so she came directly to me, but that's not typically how it happens. And she said, are you interested? And I said, yeah, I hadn't watched The Descendants. I'm a big Disney fan, but I was a little behind on that universe. So I watched it and I was like, oh God, this is actually really good. So I said yes. And then, I had to sign all sorts of non-disclosure documents and all these things that I wouldn't, talk about anything. They sent me some ideas. I think we worked together on outlines, and everything has to be approved. It's a lot more rigid of a process. When you write for yourself, it's like you can do whatever you want. You can change the story in the middle. You can put new characters in. It's not like that with Disney. I'm not just saying Disney. It's anytime you're writing for a franchise, there are rules. You have to follow the franchise, and everything has to be approved by the people who run the franchise. So, we would do my editor and I would do, outlines together, and then they would go get approved by whoever needed to approve them. And then I would start writing, and then she would edit the book, and then the book would get approved. So there was always sort of an approval, process. And, although I was really excited that there was one book that, I got to create a town in the Descendants universe. And it's this town that Allie visits, and now I can't even remember the name of the town because I wrote it so long ago. I think it was called, Louisville or something. It was named after Lewis Carroll. But anyway, so I put the town in, and then I was sort of like waiting for Disney to go, no, we don't like that. And they didn't. So they were like, that's fine. And so I have now this town in the canon that I put in the book. So that's kind of fun. Like things like that you get nerdy about.
Yeah, it's interesting though, as you say, the levels of approval. Do you not have so many levels of approval with a traditional publisher? Because I've not been traditionally published. So do you like finish the whole thing and then sell it to them? Is that the difference?
There's two ways you can do it. You can sell a full book, which a lot of writers prefer to do it that way. I sell on proposal, which means that I sell. Typically, when you sell a first book, it's always done with the full book. That's kind of the rule. There's always exceptions, but usually when you get to be published, they want to read the full book. But once you're sort of established, you can sell on proposal, which means that you sell based on usually like a short synopsis, like 3 to 5 pages, although mine are always longer, and like the first anywhere between 30 and 100 pages of the book. And so you can sell it sort of based on the idea. So that's how I prefer to do it these days. But a lot of authors don't like doing it that way because it puts a lot of pressure on the author. Because if they'd rather have it be done, and they can write it on their own time, and then they can sell it.
Right. When
you write on proposal, you have basically an idea, and then you go and sell it, and then they give you a deadline, and then you have to write to that deadline. I actually like that because it lights a fire under me, and I work good on deadline, or work well on deadlines. But at the same time, there's more pressure that way. I prefer it because I'd rather know upfront if the book's going to sell before I put in like all of that work on it. But it's really up to the author and how they want to approach it.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because if you just did this beautiful masterpiece, but then you couldn't sell it, that would be a little bit soul crushing.
Yeah, and it happens a lot. It happens. The one book, so funny, it keeps coming up, but the one book that I wrote on my own time since the beginning of my career, I should say, and I sold as a full book was The Chaos of Standing Still. And that was just one, again, it just sort of, that voice came to me. The story sort of came through me. I was loving writing it so much, that I talked to my agent about it. I said, should we send this out? And he goes, I'm feeling like because you're talking about this book in such a different way, like you say that you're feeling different when you're writing it, let's not mess with that. Why don't you finish it? and then we won't be putting that extra pressure of the deadline on the book. So that was sort of a rare case in a lot of occasions, but almost every other book I've written has been sold first and then written.
And would you say that you're guided to some extent by the business side of, so which books are selling, which of my books are selling so far? What should I write next? Or are you more guided by wherever that creative spark takes you, or a combination of both?
Yeah, it's definitely a combination. As I said, if you want to make a living, you kind of have to think of both. I don't recommend you sell to trends and you just try to write the book that you think is going to sell, but I also don't necessarily recommend that you go 100%, this is the kind of book I want to write, because they may not be buying those kinds of books right now. It'd be really hard to sell a dystopian novel right now. Maybe they're coming back around after the pandemic. I don't know. Yeah. But for a while it was everybody was selling the dystopian novels after the Hunger Games, and Divergent did well. And then you could not sell a dystopian, just like you could not sell a vampire book a couple years after Twilight. So there are certain things that sort of go secular like that. Doesn't mean you will never sell it, but at the moment, they're not buying it. There was a book that an idea that I loved, and it was a tech thriller about hackers, teen hackers. And my agent loved it. I loved it. And we shopped it, and all the publishers were like, we're not doing tech thrillers. Because there was a big tech thriller. I don't know what it was. There was a big tech thriller that didn't do well. So, it just, you sort of never know. So on one hand, you do kind of have to follow your gut, but on the other hand, you kind of have to follow the industry too and sort of know what you have the best chance at. For me, I always loved writing the really light comedies. I wrote a bunch early on in my teen publishing career. I wrote The Karma Club, My Life Undecided, these sort of pinky ones over here. I loved writing those. And then they didn't really sell as well as I think the publisher hoped. That's when I switched to sci-fi, which sold better. And then when I went back to contemporary, it was all about more serious contemporaries, more dramas, deeper issues. And so that's when I wrote The Chaos of Standing Still and The Geography of Lost Things. But I still love writing those really light ones. So now I write them for the middle grade audience. So my middle grade books are sort of lighter and funnier. So it's, you can always kind of make it work. You just have to figure out where it goes.
Yeah. So for those people that don't know, because some people still haven't worked it out, you are the person who wrote this extremely popular book. I think it's backwards to the audience that are watching, but it is, I will read for the listeners. Save the Cat writes a novel, the last book on novel writing you'll ever need. And I can honestly say this is my highlighted,
love it.
Super worn out. Look, it's got ink stains on the front to prove I am a writer. And I did read Save the Cat, which, was written by Blake Snyder. I hope I said his name right. I did.
Yeah.
And I thought, it was amazing, what the amazing moment you had. But when I tried to apply it, I couldn't quite. And then I read a few other ones and I sort of merged them all. But the minute your book landed in my hand, it's the only book I have next to me as I'm writing. So if I'm writing and I get a bit lost, I'm like, so hold on, what happens again in that part of the book? And I mean, I've written 20 books myself now, but really only 4 or 5 sort of novels. And, cause they're the ones that really need the book. And I'll still get stuck. And I'll be like, so what happens on that bit? And I mean, it's written in such an easy to understand language.
Thank you.
It's so, when I followed that book and I ended up writing Evie, Everyday Witch, Secret Magic, which is my best-selling book on Amazon, it was because of this book. And I'm normally a pantser. So a pantser just sits down and writes whatever they want, with an understanding of story structure. But when I wrote Secret Magic for Evie, I actually used that formula and I plotted it. I went, she's going to go really good for the first half of the book, and then it's going to go really bad for the second half of the book. And it's almost a bit rudimentary, it's almost too structured. And yet that book works beautifully. So, tell me, how did you come about, getting to write this book? Has it changed your life? What has it meant for you personally?
Well, thank you. I'm so happy it's helping you. And, I hear stories like this and I just get all the warm fuzzies. Cause the Save the Cat method is really what changed my life. So I loved the idea of being able to kind of pass it forward, the magic. I got in touch, or I got sort of connected with the Blake Snyder's people. He passed away in 2005. And I think it was 2009, sorry. He passed away in 2009. At that point, I had already written a couple novels using Save the Cat, and I had done a blog post about how I used Save the Cat to write a novel, and they stumbled upon my blog post. They asked if I could blog for them, so I started blogging for them, and then they asked if would you like to start teaching novelists how to use the method, and I was like, I don't know. Am I really qualified to do that? But I started teaching, and I had so much fun teaching other writers the method. I had this great workshop style thing that I would do almost monthly, I think, where a bunch of writers would come in with ideas and we'd all just like sit around and figure out what the beats were. And it was super fun. And I learned so much about how to apply the method to novels just by experiencing everyone else's stories and how they, and because you get a little bit limited and you're applying it to your own books because you're sort of always thinking in similar ways. So that really, I think, expanded it to the point where I felt confident that I was like, this method is not just for me. And it's not just for like the 5, people who are in my class this week. It's for all novels. And so, at that point, I think it was sort of an obvious choice that we would write another installment. So they asked the Save the Cat people, and we talked about it, and I said I would love to write an installment. So we pitched it, and 10 Speed Press, which is a Random House imprint, bought the book. And so I was so nervous. Everybody's was like, oh, this is going to be an amazing book, and everyone's going to love it, and it's going to be like so helpful. And that was so much pressure. And I swear,
I bet.
The funny part was I was so nervous, not about everything. But the thing that I was the most nervous about was I break down 10 different novels in the book. I do full beat sheets for 10 different books. I won't even get unless you want me to talk about it, I won't even get into the process of how I picked those 10 books, because that was a whole puzzle that is, whoa, I have nightmares about that puzzle. But I picked 10 different books to break down. And it actually started out where there was going to be 30 books that were broken down. And then it got cut down. It was too long, so it got cut down to 20 books that were broken down. And that was still too long, so we stripped it to 10. The thing I was the most nervous about was people were going to tell me I was misinterpreting classics. They were going to be like, you don't know Stephen King. Like, how dare you break down Stephen King's book? And I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who are saying that. Not one has contacted me yet, knock on wood. But I was so nervous, and I think this was coming from me being not a very good student in English class, and my...
You took the words out of my mouth. I was thinking, that sounds like English class.
I had these nightmares of my AP literature teacher going, because she said this to me. I remember my AP literature teacher telling me I did not know how to interpret Shakespeare. Like, you don't know what And it was a whole thing. My mom got involved and said, how do you know what Shakespeare meant? It was a whole thing. But I think I was scarred by this teacher who told me I didn't know how to interpret literature. And so that was my biggest nightmare, is that people were going to buy this book and go, how arrogant that you think you knew what Jane Austen was talking about. And of course, I don't ordain to say what Jane Austen was talking about, but I just break down the structure of her book, and use it to teach people how to write their books. Anyway, long story short, it was a lot of pressure. But then the book came out, and it's been so wonderful, because people are finding it helpful, which is great. Nobody's told me I've misinterpreted. I'm sure I have, but nobody's pointed that out. I think it was like the same experience that I had with the original Save the Cat, and that's been so great. So it's just, it's been amazing. I can't really say more than that. It's been really amazing.
That part where you broke down the books, I was like, wow, she's so smart.
Good.
How did she know to break down
teacher.
the books? I could never write that part of the book. That was, I helped my son, he was learning from home a lot of this year with the lockdowns, and we had to do Macbeth, and so I helped him with it quite a lot, and we only got 49%. And I was like, oh, why would I be a novelist when I can't even analyze Macbeth? So, yeah, it is intimidating when I read that part. I mean, I think you've done such a good job of breaking them down. And I guess it's again, isn't it? Like it's an example of we discover our creative confidence with every new challenge we take on. And that was a new challenge for you.
Yes.
And yeah, it is a risk when you've got to throw that thing out into the world and be like, is anybody going to pick on this? Or
yeah. And the thing that I sort of came to terms with in writing it, but then also now that it's out, is that when you break down other people's books, it is in no way you saying, this is how you wrote it. I'm not saying when I break down, I break down like, The Kite Runner, but it's a critically acclaimed, beautiful, poetic book. And I'm not saying like, Khaled Hosseini, this is what I think you're saying. I'm more like, this is how I read it. And this is what I got out of it. And I'm using it to show how structure can be applied to all these different types of stories. And this is the structure that I noticed in this book. Of course, he could have his theme stated or whatever. He could have had a whole different idea if he even was thinking that. But I think what's so great about it and what I urge other writers to do is to break down stories in your own, and it doesn't matter if it's right. It's just the act of actually breaking down those books taught me more about story structure than any of my own writing. So it's really just used as a tool to help us learn how to tell our own stories, whether those interpretations are right or not, sort of irrelevant. If you get something out of it and if you saw, oh, that's what she thinks the catalyst of that book is, like, that makes me think what my own catalyst might be, then that's really all that I hope people get out of it.
That's really, really valuable advice. Yeah, I'm going to take that on board and start breaking down and not be so scared that I'll get 49%. Thanks, Jessica.
I will say movies are easier. If you want to start on an easier place, break down movies. They're much easier to break down than books.
Yeah. Well, let's use our last 10 minutes because I'm conscious of the time. I want to talk about your courses. And, course making is super creative, and there's a variety of people that listen to this podcast. Well, I'm hoping there will be a variety of people that listen to this podcast. And so, some people out there will want to make videos or do courses. Was that tough to get started in that? Because standing in front of a camera, I mean, you're amazingly poised in front of a camera now, but was it always like that? Was that tough coming up with what to teach? Did you think, is this good enough to teach? Is it not good enough to teach? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I think when I talk to people about creating courses, I find that they fall into the people who are sort of afraid to get started. I think they fall into two different camps. One is expert syndrome and one is imposter syndrome. So the people who have expert syndrome are the people who know something so well that they don't understand that other people don't know it. So, I have to constantly remind myself that the Save the Cat method is so ingrained in me that I don't even really think about it anymore, but I have to constantly remind myself that not everybody knows about this. Not everybody knows, how these beats flow together, and I still have to explain it. So I think people who fall into expert syndrome they don't realize that they're such an expert that other people could learn from them. And that's a very common thing, is to not realize that people don't know what you know. Then the imposter syndrome is where you feel like you're not well versed enough to teach it. What business do I have teaching this? I'm not the best out there. But the thing is, when you teach, you don't have to be the best out there. You just have to be really good at explaining something. And that is, and explaining something is really just about breaking it down into actionable steps, going from A to B and B to C and C to D, and breaking down, you can break down anything into a course if you know how to break it into steps. For people to follow. And I think I sort of got a taste of that. The Save the Cat method is naturally broken down into steps. It's 15 beats. So I think I'd already kind of been in that headspace of breaking down an entire story into 15 steps. So that really, I think, helps me create my courses, is like, how can I break down other processes into actionable steps? So what I tell people when they're thinking about creating a course, I just say, what do you know how to do that other people have struggle with? And one of the quickest ways to do that is just to ask people what they're struggling with. So if you're a painter, like find other painters and say, what's your biggest pain point? Paint point. Yeah.
Not paint point, people.
What's
pain
your biggest
point.
struggle? Like, what do you struggle with every day? I struggle with, I know nothing about painting, but I struggle with cleaning my brushes. Well, I have a great tactic for cleaning my brushes. Then you can teach that. So I go out and I have a great community through the Writing Mastery Academy. I have a great community and I go out we go out with surveys all the time. Like, what are you guys struggling with? That's how we create our new courses. But you don't even need that. You need Facebook, you need Twitter, you need a community of people who do what you do. And you ask them, what are you struggling with? And if you have an answer, or you can find an answer and then break it down into steps, then you have a course. So
it's kind of merging the what matters to you with what matters to other people, and meeting their needs, as you say. Like, wow. And so your courses used to be on Udemy, but now they're on your own platform. And was that like an amazing transition for you when you suddenly went, I have the confidence to market this myself now?
It was a long time coming, and it was, I worked with my husband. He's my business partner, production partner. We had been talking about launching our own online school for many years. And it was sort of that, well, we don't have the time. We don't have enough courses, whatever the excuse was. And then we finally, in this January, so it's almost been a year now, January 2020, we decided to go for it, and we launched the Writing Mastery Academy, which you can find links to on jessicabrody.com. So we launched it, and we decided to do an all access subscription based plan for $12 a month. And you get access to every course. You get access to all the webinars. I do monthly webinars live, so you can ask questions. And then there's all these other great features, like we have a community in there with message boards, people talk. I give out bonus content every month to members, only bonus content. There's lots of fun stuff. And what was really important to us was that it was affordable. And like you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, which I forgot to reply to, about you're like, oh, these should be $500 courses. Not, maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, maybe they're, maybe in another reality they are. But I sort of have an issue with pricing education really high. And even if it's high value, I don't think it should be high priced, because I don't like the idea of creating content that is only available for a select amount of people who can afford it. I want to create content, especially when you're talking about content that is going to potentially help people start a new business, or launch a new endeavor, or learn how to write a novel, or whatever it is. Like, that shouldn't be an elite price. I don't think it should be an elite price. I think it should be an affordable price. So it's been super important to us that we keep the price affordable to people. And that's our philosophy. So,
it's really generous. It's like so generous, because again, I can't, I've bought a lot of different courses, but in all honesty, and that's why I asked you on the show, because I only interview creative geniuses at play, is the value of them is like just immeasurable, and that they are so affordable makes them, there's no excuse not to get them and not to do them. And you cover how to make great characters, how to build terrific scenes. I mean, like everything that you need. So there's no excuse to not get better at your craft. And now we also know, thank you viewers, that how to get productive. So there's no point knowing it all if you're not actually writing words. And I'm slapping myself in the face because I didn't write very many words this year. I totally let the news bombard my screen first thing. I know, worst possible thing. But, I needed that lesson, I think, and I needed that to recommit. Sometimes that happens as well. But yeah, that the fact that the courses are so accessible with such incredible information. And there's a key thing that I heard there that popped in my ears really loudly. community. Mm-hmm. So I want to finish on that as the last thing we talk about, because I think it's just beautiful, wonderful. And the fact that you've got a good price point now opens up to a larger community. What's that been like, having a community of other writers to, that you're helping and mentoring, but that are also now teaching you, and all those wonderful things that come from community? It's
so amazing. It's, we have a really great community. We have some people who are really active on the message boards and some people who are quieter. We have people who will show up at every single webinar with a question, and then I'll see new faces or new names. We have I think she's a 15-year-old writer from India who comes to every webinar, and she's so excited. She stays up till like 1 a.m, her time, to go to the webinars, and she's so excited, and she always has a great question. So it's just, I'm starting to get to know all of these people. They've become sort of like my extended writer family, and I just love it. People will, now it's gotten to the point where we've been doing it for a year. So people will come on and they'll have a question that month, and I'll remember like, oh, I remember last month you were struggling with something different. So it looks like you worked through that, and now you have this question. So it's just kind of fun to be part of everyone's process, in whether I know that or not, whether they're active on the comments or not. But it has been really, really rewarding.
You're such a warm, friendly teacher and mentor as well. So, we're blessed that you decided to teach all that you know, because a lot of creatives don't. A lot of creatives don't teach what they know. And, you're really open and honest about the pitfalls and the difficulties. And, whenever I get an email from your blog come into my, we tend not to read them, but I always read yours. Because it'll be like, I had this problem, I got stuck on this thing, and I found this great solution, and I'm like, oh, it's so practical. So thank you so much for being on the show. I learned so much from every time I talk to you. I know it's only been twice, but I feel like I've just known you forever. You're always so giving and kind and generous with your advice. And, it's that 5 people that you know business, right? So by virtue of everybody that's listening to you will now be a little bit more inspired to get off and to, get moving on their creative projects, because you got to do it. Otherwise, you're not being a creative genius at play. So thank you so much for being on the show, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really fun. And as soon as your country lets me in, I'm going to come visit you.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review, because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out thechildren'sbookauthorpodcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com, or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.